Hello, hello. Victoria here, Girlboss's executive editor. You know what they say, behind every powerful woman are more powerful women. If you're in New York City or are planning a visit before January 5th, 2025, you're going to want to head to the Music Box Theater to see Suffs the musical. I mean, really, going to see a Broadway show? Twist my arm. Suffs is a timely musical about how American women fought for the right to vote. It's more important than ever to reflect on how far we've come and how far we still need to go. Okay, picture this. Fierce women from the suffragist movement who called themselves Suffs for short, taking the stage to share their stories. It's a vibrant blend of passion, friendship, and the fight for equality, all set to moving music that'll be stuck in your head for days. This isn't just an acclaimed Tony Award-winning production. It's a reminder of the importance of using our voices and our vote. And this is your last chance to go see it. Once again, Suffs the Musical ends its Broadway run on January 5th, 2025. So grab your girls and head to the theater. This is more than just a fun night out. It's a celebration of the women who paved the way for us. Get your tickets at suffsthemusical.com. That's SUFFS musical.com. Trust me, you'll walk out feeling like you can take on the world. Oh, and be sure to bring a box of tissues because you're going to need it.
Welcome back to another episode of Girlboss Radio. I'm your host, Avery, and I'm also the founder and CEO of Bloom, an HR and DEI consulting firm. And if you're new here, I'm a big believer that work should work for all of us. If you ever have felt unsure about how to ask for more money, more benefits, or just more flexibility at work, you're not alone. But trust me, by the end of this episode, you're going to become an expert negotiator. Joining me today is Claire Wasserman, founder of Ladies Get Paid and one of the fiercest advocates for closing the wage gap and helping women get paid what they deserve. We cover everything from navigating performance reviews to timing your negotiations and building relationships with allies at work. Claire also gets real about viral career advice and why being delusional in your asks isn't the way to go. Instead, she shares smart, actionable strategies that will empower you to negotiate with confidence and clarity. Let's get into it. Claire, welcome to Girlboss Radio. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here and get ladies paid.
So what inspired you to create Ladies Get Paid?
I think what inspired me to create Ladies Get Paid was sexism. No, it was frustration around the wage gap and feeling just so disappointed and quite frankly disgusted that in 2025, okay, because we're almost 2025, that we still have things like the wage gap and the leadership gap and the funding gap. And as an individual, this is the question I asked myself 8 years ago, what could I possibly do to combat something that's so systemic and overwhelming that will require, years and policy change and things basically that need me to be patient for? And I don't have a lot of patience. So my aha moment came when I realized a friend was not charging as much as her male counterparts. And she was a very talented freelance art director. When I asked her, well, why wasn't she charging more? She said two things. And this was where Ladies Get Paid was born. Two things. It was one, I didn't have the information. And number two, I didn't feel comfortable charging more. And the aha moment was, let's at least start talking about it. And I began to bring women together in these town halls, in-person meetings for us to really dive into what was making us uncomfortable to declare our worth at work. And salary negotiation, the education was that tangible next step that I could see that we could take as individuals, at least to close our own wage gap as the start for something bigger.
I think that a lot of us have had that experience before where either we have acknowledged that we're not necessarily getting paid the same as our male counterparts. In 2024, women in the United States earn 82% of what men earn. But we know that the wage gap is getting bigger. It's widening, and it's going to take, they're proposing that it's going to be taking decades for us to get to a point of gender wage parity.
It's complicated and it's straightforward. So for anybody who's hearing these statistics and feeling like I did, like, well, what can I do? I'm just too overwhelmed. If you have to do one thing besides making sure that you're being paid appropriately, it's for moms, because that's actually where the wage gap starts. It's called the motherhood penalty. So for every child that a woman has, she can see a reduction in pay. And a lot of times it has to do with the lack of childcare, affordable childcare. So women will opt out of the workforce because not necessarily that they want to, but it's what they can afford, right? It's expensive to take care of, to pay somebody to take care of children. And then they need to get back into the workforce. They've lost years. That's where I say it's both complicated and also straightforward. We just need better policies around supporting working families and working moms. The other thing is always make sure you are being paid appropriately. And the way to do that is by asking a white man who has a similar job to you at a competitor company. So it's not Glassdoor. It's not anonymous reviews. You got to talk to real people at very specifically the company that is most similar to yours in the role that is most similar to yours, because context really does matter when you're talking about compensation.
Absolutely. And you and I talked about that a little offline prior to starting this conversation. And you mentioned Glassdoor. A lot of people go to Glassdoor for guidance in terms of getting that context. I think that they think that this is a reliable source for us to better understand compensation and what we should be getting paid. Do you believe that Glassdoor is a good resource for everyone?
Yeah, it's one resource. So I would really challenge you to think like a detective, okay, or a lawyer, right? You're building a case and you're going to feel way more confident in this case that you build if you have a diversity of resources. It's also a little bit of an experiment for you. Maybe you send an email out to a bunch of friends of all genders and they connect you with somebody who does a similar job to you. See if gender matters. Is there pay parity for you? Here's the reason why I say get a diversity of sources. I would love it if everybody, during their negotiation, and this is for somebody who is applying for a new job and negotiating, as well as for the person who's looking for a promotion at their current job, don't just make the conversation about here's the money I want, yes or no, because that conversation will end too quickly. I would say make the conversation about the process of how you came to the conclusion that this is the number you're asking for. The reason this becomes a very interesting shift is because it gets the other side, right? HR, now they should be sharing with you. How did they come up with their number? Now you can see, whatever number you get today, what does growth look like? How does this company determine where you are in what's called a pay band? And most importantly, in my mind, how will you grow? And grow with the company, hopefully, right? It's both feeling more confident in the number you ask for, but it's also being able to articulate your process so that you get them to open up what I see as a black box of HR.
What recommendations do you have for folks that are interviewing right now that are either coming across jobs where the salary band is listed or they're coming across an opportunity where the salary band isn't listed? How do they navigate the initial conversations around their salary with more confidence and, of course, with more ease?
Well, first, let's just have everybody acknowledge that negotiating your salary is an expected part of the process of getting a job, okay? So the fact that you are going to be asking for more, and I think every single person should be asking for more, that is not going to be penalizing to you just because you asked. It is all in how you ask, when you ask, okay? And there are extra considerations that women, and particularly women of color, need to do. And I can go into more detail about that. But I want everyone to remember that the other side, okay, HR, they are expecting you to counter. So keep that in mind. The other thing I would love everyone to do well before they interview and well before they negotiate is really to reflect on your relationship with money. What does it take for you to pay for the life that you need to have and want to have? So we're talking about budgets here. This is a great opportunity to explore bare necessity, of course. So if you had to take a pay cut, and the opportunity was worth it, all right, what is the financial sacrifice that you're even able to make? That's your bottom line. But more importantly, let's forget about surviving. Let's talk about thriving. What are your big, rich money goals? And it doesn't just have to be about, giving back to others. Have a big, crazy idea of what you'd really like to get as well. And that's your aspiration. What the research you're doing next is seeing where do these jobs fit into your life and your goals. That's the empowering stance to take so that you're not just always going off of, well, what's the best I can get? That's some desperation and scarcity mode. Now, I understand the strongest negotiators are the ones who are able and willing to walk away too. So I always want to acknowledge there is an element of privilege in this, which is why please, everyone, be authentically building your network because they're going to catch you. The network is your safety net. Look into side hustles, side revenues, just make sure you're your best safety net in all of this. So that's always my first step before you even get into the negotiation. Now, I want to make sure you're not wasting your time. So when you are interviewing for this job, if you have no idea what they're going to pay you, and it turns out it's not very much, and in fact, it's below what you can afford to even pay your rent on, don't waste your time and don't waste their time. Other piece, though, and you mentioned, was salary ranges. A lot of times there are huge ranges. I kind of love that in a way because they just showed their cards. They just said to everybody, we can afford to pay this high amount. Now, of course, you're thinking, but it's such a range. What do I ask for? You will ask for the highest amount because they said that they can afford the highest amount. By the way, making sure that, of course, you did your market research and it's comparable, right? So if their range is nothing to do with what you found in the market, this needs to be a discussion. But let's just assume, yeah, their range, it fits with the market. You're going to ask for the highest, and you're going to make a really compelling case about how investing in you is investing in them. You're a top performer. Why would you not ask for top dollar? Let them tell you no. Let them negotiate you down. In the third scenario, they haven't told you anything. Do you say your number? No, you ask, what is the number? What's the ballpark? And you could mention some research that you did and mention the high amount. But again, grounded in real research. This is why no one needs to be nervous if you did your research. It's just math, as long as you make a compelling case to support that math, which I know we'll get into more detail on how to actually do that.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what's interesting about this conversation today is that I'm the HR person on the other end that you're talking about. So I'm going to share some additional context more than I usually would in this conversation just to help to guide people along. Because I think that right now we have an awesome opportunity for me to kind of share how I would respond. One of my biggest recommendations to people when they're navigating salary negotiations is at the very beginning of the interview process, when you're asked. Sometimes you're asked to fill it out. Sometimes you're asked verbally through a phone screen or an initial interview, is to, again, ask what is the salary range for this role if that information is not included. However, there's a lot of legislation across the United States and Canada that requires organizations legally, if they're above a certain size, to include salary ranges. So I find that more companies now than ever have been including that information, which is amazing. So in the event that you have that information in your back pocket, I would recommend that if you are pushed to give them your salary range or what your expectations are, which you usually are, be explicit about that, share that information. There's nothing more frustrating than being on the receiving end of someone who's like, I don't know, I want more information from you, or they're kind of tiptoeing around the conversation. It really pisses off recruiters if I'm being candid. So I think the alternative to this is my range, like they have presented with you. And I want to treat this conversation as an evolving dialogue through this interview process. So that holds space for you to share a different number, whether it be more or less, through the interview process as you learn more about the company, the opportunity, then of course, to Claire's point, the potential for growth for you. Money isn't the number one lever for all folks when they're navigating an interview process. And there's lots of things that might sweeten the deal. If you get to work from home, you're not commuting, and you don't have to worry about paying for gas in a car or public transportation, that might be something that will encourage you to be like, oh, you know what, I can actually accept $5,000 less a year. I mean, of course, we all want to make the most amount of money as possible, but there's always these different considerations. And unfortunately, a lot of companies just don't share that information that most people require to make that fulsome decision around what their expectations are.
I am curious, though, for you, what do you think about, because I have an opinion on this, but what do you think about separating the salary conversation from the full compensation conversation? So for anybody listening and watching who's like, what is full comp? Very important for you to know it's benefits, right? It's what Avery mentioned in terms of working from home, or maybe they're paying for your gas money or commute. Like that is a benefit in addition to your salary. But there are two camps of recruiters or HR folks that think differently. One camp says, negotiate your salary and the full comp benefits all at the same time. Do you talk about them all together, or do you decide on the base salary first and then say, let's discuss full comp? And if so, should you be the one to bring that up or the other person? Again, I have an opinion, but I am super curious to hear which camp you fall into. And I don't think there's necessarily a right or a wrong. I think it's about leverage, but curious, Avery, what do you think?
I'm of the opinion with this that it really depends on the individual. I don't think there's a one size fits all solution or answer to this. There are some folks where total comp is super important. And in those cases, I would recommend that you're having those conversations as part of the initial discussions around salary early on into the interview process. However, if you're one of those people that's like, I care more about how much money I'm making dollar for dollar in my salary, that's what's going to make the biggest impact in my life right now. And whatever comes from total comp, perks, benefits, whether I can work from home, like health benefits, dental, whatever, that's like nice to have. And there's a lot of people out there that get access to those types of things through their partner. So they don't care. I'm not really in a camp. I'm more so based on the individual, based on what it is that you want, what you're looking for. I think that that would be my recommendation. However, I would say that this is one of the reasons why I recommend that people frame it around, I want to treat this as an evolving dialogue through the interview process, because ultimately you want to use as many levers as you possibly can to your benefit through the negotiation process. So you have the opportunity to revisit what you did say that you wanted later on in that interview process and experience.
Yeah, I agree on that. And in general, I would fall into the camp of agree on the base salary first and then say, I'd like to discuss full compensation. See what it is that they're offering while having done the research and preparation on your part to now say, sounds great. And always add something. Do your best though. Position it as a benefit to them. Never feel like when you're asking for something, it's like a favor or more for you means less for them. No. Investment. I always take this analogy of you are not an employee anymore. You are an LLC and they are your venture capitalists. Okay. You are pitching them on why an investment in you, it's not charity, but rather it's an investment in themselves. They will get a return on that investment when they hire you or when they promote you. And that's not a lie. Otherwise you don't work there anymore. Like we all have margins on our paychecks if we work for somebody else. If they were losing money by keeping us on staff, we wouldn't work there anymore. So you really have to understand, what is the money that I make for this company? What is that margin? And your entire case for more is about that. So if you can really get into that kind of entrepreneurial mindset when pitching, I really believe it'll get you into that empowering, it's an opportunity to look good and to not feel awkward. Again, like, am I going to disrupt or jeopardize this relationship? No, this is all about growth. Aren't they going to be happy to hear that?
I've had the benefit of being on the receiving end of many negotiations, like I'd say thousands at this point in my career. And I've seen so many unique things that people have negotiated for to make their lives a little bit easier or to sweeten the package. There was once where there was a woman that was like a senior executive. This was like at the time the highest paying person I'd ever hired for. And it was a little earlier on in my career. But this woman was like, I want a parking spot. I want a car allowance. I want my phone paid for, not a company phone, my additional phone, because I know y'all are going to be reaching out to me on that. I want to be able to keep my computer at the end of this. And she also negotiated for a stipend for her wardrobe. And on top of that, she negotiated a signing bonus to be paid out as not like it wasn't a signing bonus. Because the thing is, if you get a signing bonus, it's taxed always. Whereas if you get a signing bonus, but they frame it as an expense, you'll get the full amount of money. So yeah, if for anyone that negotiates signing bonuses, they're great. I've definitely done it, but I've made the mistake earlier on in my career where I negotiated a signing bonus and then I got it on my first paycheck and I was like, whoa, 50% of it's gone because it went to the government. So, okay, with that, I wanted to ask you a quick question. What recommendation do you have for people that are not navigating a negotiation process, but they're really anxious right now because they desperately need this job? And they know that they'll take anything, but they don't want to be taken advantage of throughout the process.
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, always therapy. That's my joke. It's like, get the ladies get paid book, but also, be working on the mindset stuff. But not everything's mindset. You really do need to have those savings. Starting small is fine. Brick by brick, be saving your money. There's a danger in charging too low. Like we pay for what we think is valuable. And this goes for anybody who's full-time employee, but also contractor, freelancers, a business, right? A coach. If you're saying this is my work and I stand by it and it brings results, but it's cheap, yikes. So know there's a danger in pricing yourself too low. And also, this is a conversation, right? So if you're positioning this as this is the market research I did, here's the work that I've done that has had impact on the business bottom line. I believe that I should be around X, but I'm curious, tell me about, your process for how you determine comp and where you see me fitting into the pay band. then it's not you planting a flag in the ground that you can never walk back from. It's just the starting point for a larger conversation. So just know whatever this next salary is or whatever their answer is, it's not the final salary forever, okay? It is a starting point. This is also why you shouldn't be basing your next salary on what you currently make, even though they'll want to do that, only because you may have grown. Whatever this negotiation is, like, just draw the line between it is your worth in the market in their eyes, has nothing to do with your worth as a human being, or quite frankly, what another company might be willing to pay you, or in another year, what the market now might be rewarding based on your skills and your contacts. Like, this stuff can be kind of fickle too. Both humanize yourself and the other person, but also depersonalize it. And it's a tricky needle to thread.
I agree that a lot of this information is super important to have. It's critical for you as someone that's trying to navigate this early, new beginning. One thing that I'd flag though is that oftentimes HR folks, specifically recruiters, don't have a lot of access to why decisions are made around compensation, specifically salary bands. It's like in most companies, especially larger ones, a whole other department that they don't have a lot of access to. For startups and smaller teams, perhaps they'd have that information. So I think that peppering them around, why did you make this decision? How do you align on compensation? Their head might spin and be like, you know what, this candidate is like too much. And you might bruise that relationship with that person. But what I would recommend is that when you're having the conversation around compensation, number one, if they ask you what you're currently earning, in most states and specifically all through Canada, you can't actually legally ask candidates that information anymore. So a lot of organizations have thrown that out as a best practice. So that's one thing. So you can just say, in response to, what are you currently earning? You can say, my expectations around salary are A to B. That's how you can strategically respond to that question. The second point to this is you can always, if you're like desperate for a job, and we've all been there because you need to make ends meet, you got to pay for your bills, your rent, your mortgage, et cetera, you could negotiate a salary review and revision 6 months upon your joining the team. So I've seen this happen time and time again where someone will join the organization within the range that they were presented with. And a part of their actual signing contract for their employment agreement, they will negotiate a compensation review and perhaps an increase that has already been committed to upon 6 months of their time within the team, which I think is a very good strategy to get something, but then to perhaps work towards getting what you want in the near future.
Yeah. And just make sure you really know what the metrics of success are, that this isn't going to be an arbitrary conversation of like how everybody feels about performance. Like, particularly for women, we oftentimes are evaluated in very personal terms, whereas for men, they're evaluated where it's more objective, more metric oriented. You can actually do something with that information versus like, well, I just feel you need more executive presence. Like, we don't want this to be abstract. Otherwise, you will always feel lacking, or you'll always be confused and not confident because of that. So whether or not you're doing that at the moment of the negotiation is another thing entirely, but please make that within your first 90 days. You've got to know that information.
Totally. And speaking of performance, we are moving into performance review season. If not, we're in the thick of it. What recommendations do you have for folks that are preparing for performance reviews?
I would say if you can, go find the original job description from when you were first hired, or do your best to go back in time in your emails, just seeing like what were the responsibilities, what was my scope at the beginning, and then writing up almost like a new job description for yourself now. What did you actually do? Seeing that change in scope, seeing the impact that you've had, and finding very specific, as I call it, case studies. So what were the things that you did that really moved the needle for the business, both in terms of money and also time, because time is money. If you are unclear on any of these things, that simply means you need to become that detective again. Go do your research. Who can you talk to gather that information? Is this an internal person? Is this external? Or are these about clients? By the way, testimonials are great. So if anyone ever sent you an email telling you did a great job, bring that in with you. Like, start to compile really a case file. I've had clients actually that I've worked with, that I've coached, who created whole PowerPoint presentations, again, like they were a business seeking investment. So they treated it in that way. But you really want to start with, what were you hired for? And then what did you actually do? And if it seems, by the way, that there's been about a 20% change in scope, you should be eligible for an automatic raise. Although some people tell me they've had a decrease in responsibilities, so maybe we don't bring that up. But point being, it's all about the work that you did and the impact that you had on the business bottom line. And it is up to you to articulate that. It's not your manager. I mean, perhaps they're the one who makes the decision or, articulates your case to somebody else who's the gatekeeper, but they're busy. They're worried about themselves. But just so you know, when you talk about the great work you've done, that reassures your manager that they're doing a great job managing. Whether or not they really are, that's another story. But it's not about self, it's about service. Okay. This is the service I provide at this company. So please, for anybody who's feeling potentially like, oh, I get so uncomfortable, feel so salesy. Not at all. You're actually making the other people that you're speaking to feel even better that they hired you.
Is there something that folks can do throughout the year? Because sometimes performance reviews happen usually on an annual or a biannual basis. So by the time it gets to their performance review, they're like, I don't even remember what happened. Like, I feel like I blacked out and now I'm sitting here in front of you and we're having this important conversation. What can people do to ensure that they are prepared with that information about their accomplishments to present in front of their manager?
It's really, again, on you. Imagine you're the business and you put your product online. You're going to want to have, testimonials. You got to go collect those testimonials. So whether or not you're doing that from other people, you got to do it for yourself. So your own testimonial. Here's this project I worked on. I mean, anytime you have a win of any kind, document it. Other things to document, by the way, challenges, something that was difficult, whether it was difficult for you or it was difficult for the company, something that was important for the company. Like, we've got high stakes here. We need to do this event in a short turnaround time with no budget, no resources, go. So all of those things, all those elements make for a really compelling story, because that's really what you're being rewarded for. It's your ability to tell the story of your wins, right? Because it's unfortunately not just, I think my work will speak for itself. No, we really have to speak for our work. So document it along the way.
And storytelling is one of the most powerful skills that people can leverage in order to perhaps convince and or advocate for themselves, however you want to frame it. One thing that I wanted to mention as well is that I've noticed more and more people are actually keeping work journals. I do it, and I have a few friends that do it. So I don't know if it's a trend yet, but maybe it is. If you're listening to this and you keep a work journal, let me know so I can see if this is the thing. What they're doing and what I do is I keep track of my wins, and I have an intentional moment of every day where I'm reflecting on something that I did. This has been like critical for me as an entrepreneur because I don't have someone that I report into. So that would be my recommendation for folks that maybe need a little bit of support with that.
Yeah, because I think what you're saying is there's, how we feel about something. Feelings are not facts. I mean, they're valid and they should absolutely be explored. But what is the hard proof point here of the work that we did? I also want to acknowledge that there are people out there who are not able to get a lot done because they are in toxic workplaces, or there's mismanagement, or the inefficiencies of others don't allow them to really have wins. So what you're looking to do here, I think it's about process. Did you improve anything? So maybe there was no end result, but let's say you made meetings run better, or people were really disorganized in the way they were communicating by email, and you created a centralized spreadsheet, or just anything that you can point to that was in service of the business. Doesn't always have to have a great big, award ceremony at the end of it, okay? The other thing I do want to mention is really get allies, okay? So, and this goes beyond your manager. Make sure other people, I think other people in other departments are good too, that they know who you are and that they believe in your potential. And to me, the future is about your ideas and your enthusiasm, and particularly your enthusiasm to learn. If you are articulating that to the right people, okay, so the people who have any kind of influence at the company, that includes executive assistants, everybody, okay? So it's not just, I need to go to the CEO. You need to be going to the person who the CEO listens to, okay? Develop those relationships, invest in those relationships. They will help amplify you to the people who make decisions. And it's, yes, paycheck, but it's about promotion, and it's about your next job, whether it's at this company or wherever that person goes next, they can take you with you.
Yeah. And that's one thing I actually wanted to talk to you about, because I think that when we talk about salary negotiations, so often people are being encouraged to gather the information, do your research, have a really good case. And I think that all of those things are really important. What I've noticed is that likability is a really important factor in who gets raises and who doesn't. And I find that that directly relates to all different types of bias, which we don't have time to get into today. But I'm actually curious, Claire, like, do you think that likability and relationships has an influence on whether you get a raise or not?
Oh, I mean, it has an influence on everything. And here's the unfortunate truth. And I know we're not talking too much about biases, but I have to acknowledge it. We bond with people who remind us of ourselves. And that is part of the reason why the people in power who are tend to be white males, they're going to bond with a white male and say, I see their potential. What they're really saying is, I see my own potential, or I see myself right in them. That doesn't mean you can't connect with people who don't look like you at all. Like, you 1000%, like, you can. But really, if you want somebody to guide you, make them feel like your guide. And that's not asking them for a bunch of time, but it's saying, hey, I saw you spoke at this conference, or I heard you on a podcast, and you comment on their LinkedIn. I know that makes me sound like I'm telling people to just go flatter somebody, but that's a part of it. Again, it's never actually really about you. It's really about how you make the other person feel about themselves.
When you have a conversation around negotiations is also very important, whether it be through the interview process, whether it's a formal or an informal opportunity. Sometimes people will approach a conversation, they're looking for a cost of living increase, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't matter what you're negotiating for. Oftentimes how the person is feeling on the other end is really important. And this is so true for informal times. So times that aren't necessarily centered around an opportunity for you to have a conversation like this. So to me, this is like a time outside of an annual performance review, outside of the interview process, where you're wanting to negotiate an increase in your salary, but they're not necessarily anticipating it. How does timing come into factor when we're having these conversations with folks?
I think first, if you can find out when budgets are decided, that's going to increase the likelihood that you get the raise, right? So if normally reviews are in February, but budgets are decided in November, and you're waiting till February to ask for more, they're going to tell you not this year, right? So see who can give you that information. If you've had any kind of win, okay, especially if you could show them an email, or there's a thing that happened, the client was thrilled, you landed the client, whatever, that might be a good time. Here's my opinion, and I have a feeling you'll probably agree with this. You don't want to spring it on anybody, okay? You don't want to just say, hey, I'd like to have the meeting, and they feel blindsided. No, we want to prepare them, but this is not a one-size-fits-all kind of counsel I'm giving here, because for some companies, I had a client, this was his issue. Every time that he would bring up broaching the subject, they would ghost him, basically. They would like never schedule the meeting. So he sort of felt like he had to pin them down. In his case, though, I said, it's not about, I need more money, make a decision now. But it was really about, I want to talk to you about the impact I've had on this business, because I have some ideas moving forward. So to actually start with getting them really excited about your work and about their future with you, and use it as the first part of maybe like a 3-part conversation that would eventually lead to more money. So you are sort of springing it on them, but it's not starting with the paycheck.
Yeah. So for me, any meetings that you have that are a regular cadence, so maybe it's like a morning meeting or a huddle or a one-on-one where this isn't necessarily something that's been established that you talk about during this time, I think it's important to carve out a intentional time for you to have this conversation so they can show up with the information that you'll need them to be aware of to receive this conversation with more confidence. But then I think that too, if you're on the receiving, maybe you're on a Zoom call or whatever, and you're sitting right in front of them, and you can tell that this person is noticeably tired, frustrated, angry, hungry, whatever. Just, you have to be flexible with pushing out that timeline a little bit, or that date, and maybe saving it for another time. I think that this is one of the biggest mistakes that people make in negotiations, is that you do all the research, you do all the preparation, and you do it wonderfully. But then you have this time or this day that you're going to have that conversation, and the day comes, rain or shine. And by rain or shine, I mean the manager that you're speaking to, they're in a great mood or they're in a terrible mood, you're saying it, or you push it to like the very last 5 minutes of a meeting that you have. And it's like, you're not setting yourself up for success. You may as well throw all the research, all the time out the window, because that person will be like, whoa, context shifting. I'm not ready to have this conversation with you, or this isn't a good time. And then you get an immediate shutdown. Whereas if you set up the meeting with the intention of, I want to have a conversation about my compensation with you, you're not going to be met with the immediate no of, right now's not a good time. We don't have enough time to discuss this, or hey, we had some other things we need to discuss first that are more critical at this moment.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice. Yeah. And just know it's the beginning of a conversation. You shouldn't feel rushed to say yes or no in the moment, and neither should they. And my opinion is a no is a not yet anyway. And just always come back to it's how you do it is the most important piece.
So speaking about how people navigate negotiations, what recommendations do you have on things that people should never do?
Never speak ill of anyone else. Don't talk trash about a former boss. Just see that everything that comes out of your mouth is an opportunity to look good by making them feel good. And the way that you make them feel good is about your potential with this company. Again, you've made impact, you've got ideas. They can see how you think, how you work, all the value you've brought to the company culture, et cetera. So keeping everything positive is always the way to go.
There's been an influx of career advice from a lot of well-meaning people on TikTok. What is the worst piece of advice that you've seen go viral on socials?
Ooh, I'm too much of I was going to say boomer, but I'm technically a millennial. So I don't know what's quite gone viral. I'd love to hear you tell me what it is, and then I'll give you my hot take immediately back. I'll tell you a terrible piece of advice I used to give to people that I have now, I want to take it back. I used to go around stamping dollar bills. Okay. So I would do these in-person events all around the country, talking about money, work, and worth. And I stamped these dollar bills in pink, get paid what you deserve. And I take that back. I take that back because whatever you think you deserve, it's probably more. Because I've seen a lot of women, like I've got 55,000 women in my community. They've exchanged almost 4 million messages at this point on Slack. Like that's a slice of women. And the majority of them don't actually believe that they are worth much. Okay. So they don't have an inflated sense of ego. However, there's also people who do have an inflated sense of ego or think that they should go into HR and say, pay me what I deserve. What I mean by this expression, get paid what you deserve, it's really a starting point for us to really question ourselves. What is worth? What does, quote, deserve mean? It doesn't mean that that's the line you use on HR. And it's also hopefully an invitation to, I deserve the world. Everybody does. You don't have to earn it. Like just your birthright. Like you're a living human being who can contribute to humanity by just your energy, by your presence. That's wonderful. So I take my advice back, or those stamped dollar bills back, because I think it's too confusing and it's misinterpreted. Though, of course, between you and I, like we can always say, yeah, we deserve it, but like not the case to make to HR, because it's not really about fairness ultimately.
I mean, a great HR practitioner would be centering fairness and equity, but the problem is that most aren't. So I appreciate that context. You asked me what I think. I think that the most egregious hot take that I found around salary negotiations is to quote unquote be delusional. I think that's like a.
Oh my gosh. Wait. Okay. So I was interviewed on another podcast, and the guest who was in before me had said to her, and I know she's not the only person who has said this, but said, say the biggest number you can possibly say with a straight face. Right. And I'm like, yes, if it's the market research, like it's not a random number. It's not the highest number you can think of in your mind. Like, well, then that would be $1 billion. Like, what does that even mean? It's got to be rooted in reality because you have to defend it. You have to bring research and receipts and back it up. And so that the conversation is really about the research and the receipts. It's almost like the numbers. It's not even, that's like the very end is like, okay, now we're in agreement about the number. How the heck do we even get here? Who are you and what is your value? And I thank you for bringing that up because I said I have to respectfully disagree because I like the person who had given that advice, but she is very senior also. And that's not, most people are not in positions of power, when they're negotiating like she is. Or maybe you could do that. I don't know. But she doesn't even work for anyone anymore. She works for herself.
That's the thing. A lot of people that work for themselves will go around giving advice to people that doesn't necessarily work in an environment that they haven't necessarily been in a long time. And I think that's one of the biggest issues I see with like career advice right across the board. You see independent coaches and consultants that work in their own kind of bubble and silo. And it's just they've been out of that practice for so long that they're not aware of like what the reality is. So speaking of reality, to my earlier point, the be delusional, you have to remember remember that whether you are interviewing for a job or whether you are navigating a potential promotion or a performance review, you are being judged. And being delusional might have you fall into the category where people start to question other elements of your performance and or your capabilities. So it's just something that you need to be really mindful of, is that I think that being delusional is something that sounds so good, and in certain contexts, like, go for it. But I think when it comes to the workplace, it's not an individualistic experience. What you make impacts and influences other people. You can't roll through and be like, oh, I want $100,000 more than what the average person makes for this job. So your point, Claire, earlier around all the research, the context, really kind of gathering that fulsome understanding with all these tools and as to what it is that this job is worth within the context of the company that you'd be working in. I think that that's really important. So that delusion, sometimes it might get you someplace, but it's not like a tried and tested approach that I think will work every single time. So I'd say no.
And also, just every time that you are interviewing, negotiating, whatever, regardless of if you get the offer or get the money you're asking for, these are real people that you are connecting with. And this is the network that you're building, that you're going to hopefully be able to, leverage and also contribute to moving forward. Again, this person's not necessarily going to always work at this company. They may think of you moving forward. So the way that you comport yourself, again, it's not what you say, it's how you say it is probably most important. Leave a great impression, but that doesn't mean asking for the lowest number. Okay. So I just want to be clear. Again, it's a needle to thread, but yeah. Thank you for bringing up the delusion part. You obviously activated me on that one. I'm very passionate about that one.
I think it's a great place for us to also leave off this conversation. I think you and I could talk for hours. Maybe we'll have like another conversation at another day with another part of like negotiations and centered around ladies getting paid. But with that, for folks that want to continue to follow along on your journey, where can they find you?
Yes. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram at Claire Gets Paid. Our website is ladiesgetpaid.com. I'm right now in the midst of moving it over. So you can also check out coachmeclaire.com. But probably the best place to find me is LinkedIn. So Claire Wasserman. I can take on a couple more clients this year, and I have a fabulous Earn Better salary negotiation video course on demand. But I'm here, I'm a real person. So reach out, send me a note on LinkedIn. If this resonated with you, I want to connect with you. I want to help you, and super appreciate the opportunity today, Avery. And, I love Girlboss, so appreciate getting to be part of your world.
Claire, thank you. You definitely know your shit as an HR person. I think that it's so important that people are getting like good advice that's rooted in reality around this. So I hope lots of people go your way for support, because I mean, how much we get paid has a huge influence on our life and the quality of our life. So thank you for all the work that you do.
Yeah. And everybody, pay it forward. Just know that the more money you make, it's good for generations to come. Share your salary too with other people. Like, pay it forward by being transparent. It can only help, not just others, but yourself. Okay. If we do this. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
And that's a wrap on my conversation with Claire. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. What's the biggest challenge you've ever faced when it comes to salary negotiation or advocating for yourself at work? Send us a DM on Instagram at Girlboss Radio, and don't forget to follow us for even more no BS career advice. Tune in next week for another episode with a very special guest. And in the meantime, if you enjoyed today's episode, leave us a comment and give us a 5-star review. It really helps others discover the show. As always, this podcast is produced by Victoria Christie and Camilla Nizio and edited by Diego Domine. Until next time, keep blooming.